Blog Talk Radio.
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and as always, we've got a great show for you tonight. We're going to be starting off here in just a moment or two with another great round of Coach's Corner, and I got two fantastic professionals, both been on the show a number of times, not only as a guest, but also on the Coach's Corner panel, so I know we're going to have a good show tonight. And then a little bit later, I'm really excited, as the guys can attest to when they come on here. I've been speaking probably for the last 10 minutes about my very special guest tonight, the affectionately known as the Little Pro, Eddie Merrins. He's the legendary golf instructor and a PGA Hall of Fame member, as well as professional at the Bel-Air Country Club out in California. And he's going to be joining me on the second half of the show, so I'm very, very excited about that. And but in the meantime, I want to thank all of you for tuning in faithfully each week, live here Thursday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. Central. And obviously most of you know how to find us here, but just for those that maybe you're a little unclear, we're located at blogtalkradio.com, and up in the search key, if you type Golf Talk Live, that will bring you here to the show. And as I said, it's live every Thursday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time, or 7 to 9 for those of you on the East Coast, and 4 to 6 Pacific Time for those of you out on the West Coast. You can also catch us on iTunes or Stitcher.com under the podcast section. Again, just type in Golf Talk Live, and you can find us there and listen to it whenever it's convenient. Or, as I said, if you're on blogtalkradio.com, just scroll down when you get to my page to the on-demand section if you can't tune in live, and you can listen to it there on the recorded version whenever it's convenient for you. But thank you for joining in, for those of you who did live tonight. You can always speak to the guests or call into the show during the live broadcast on Thursday. The number to call is area code 646. Or you're welcome to email me any questions or comments about the show to ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. And if you're somebody in the golf profession and you're interested in maybe being a guest on the show, you don't necessarily have to be a teach professional or a coach. Maybe you're an entrepreneur, or maybe you've written a great golf book that you think you'd like to share with the audience. Again, please reach out to me to ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. Always update, of course, on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and also on LinkedIn.com. My Twitter handle, of course, is Ted and Buck CEO, CEO being in capital letters. And Golf Talk Live blog is the link to go to on Facebook, and, of course, LinkedIn.com. You can just search under my personal name, Ted Odorico, and you'll find me there. As I said, I got a couple of great professionals joining me here on the Coach's Corner panel tonight, James T. Kyle and Bill Abrams. And let me tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll get them on here live to join us. James, of course, is a PGA professional and owner of the James Kyle Golf Academy. He was also the 2014 West Central Chapter PGA Teacher of the Year, as well as the 2012 West Central Chapter PGA Junior Golf Leader of the Year. Also received an honorable mention in 2011 as top 50 teacher, with U.S. Kids Golf. And also Bill Abrams is on the program tonight, been on many, many times as well. PGA professional and owner and director of instruction, the Golf Solutions Academy, Balmoral Woods in Crete, Illinois, as well as now at the Golf Channel Academy at TPC Eagle Trace in Coral Springs, Florida. And he was recently named the 2017 Central Illinois Chapter Teacher of the Year. Guys, welcome back, should I say, to Coach's Corner here on Golf Talk Live.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks for having us, Ted. This is an absolute pleasure once again.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, guys, and thank you for giving of your time. As I always tell you off air, it's not always easy. I know you guys are very, very busy, and sometimes have to rush home just to make it in time to get on the show. So I appreciate you doing that. All right, guys, we're going to talk, got a sort of a mixed bag if you will, of questions tonight that I'm going to throw at you. And James, I think I'm going to start with you this time, just to mix it up a little bit different. And then Bill, I'm going to have you come in as well on the question. And I guess the first question that a lot of people ask, and I think it really depends, obviously, on the level of player, but a lot of people ask me this question. They say, how do I know what clubs to keep in the bag? So, James, if you were going to advise a player, let's just sort of whittle it down. Let's talk about maybe a beginning golfer and maybe an intermediate golfer. Obviously, we'll leave the pros out of here for the time being, but maybe some of our beginning golfers and an intermediate golfer. What would you suggest or recommend that they have in their bag?
Beginning players, whenever you're getting them ready, fitting them, they need to have golf clubs that help them get the ball in the air. So I typically go after hybrids. Maybe it might sound crazy, but I actually try to start my building of their set with a hybrid, and probably a few of them. And usually I try to start the hybrids at a 6, where it would take the place of a 6-iron, because they're great to get the ball in the air, and the player typically enjoys that easier club to hit from all conditions. And in the fairway woods, whenever I do fit them for those, I rarely fit a 3-wood or even a 4-wood. I almost always start with a 7-wood and maybe a 5-wood, depending on how strong they might be. Driver, lofted, more loft than not loft, 10 degrees, even some with 12 degrees to really, again, those new players need to see the ball go in the air. Irons, sometimes graphite, but again, like you said, depending on the player you're working with, whether they're a man or a woman, some of them need steel. And the set usually begins with 7-iron and down to like a pitching wedge or gap wedge. And sand wedge for sure, probably not a lob wedge just yet, because they're not going to be used to using it. That might be coming, a little bit more down the road. But yeah, beginning players, those hybrids that really all the companies are producing, it doesn't even matter what product you buy, they're just so good for those players, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I agree. And Bill, I want you to chime in on that. And then actually, funny enough, James, you actually kind of loaded right into my next question, and that was, so Bill, I'm going to ask you this, but I want you to obviously chime in on the first part of the question. But a lot of people ask me that very same thing is also, should I change maybe my long irons to hybrid clubs? Let's start with that, and then, or if you want to pick up on where James was talking and maybe add some thoughts there, and then talk about the hybrids as well.
Well, I'll certainly ditto James on the idea with loft, and that's one of the things that players have a very bad concept of, that the club with less loft will always go further. There's a point of diminishing return depending on the club head speed and the ball speed you can create. I'll see a lot of players that are intermediate that 6-iron and the 5-iron go the same distance, and even the 4. So what we can do is we can consolidate one club there and utilize a hybrid there. I always feel that it's the idea when it's time to change from long irons to hybrids is what I call an effective loft of the shot, meaning that you can more or less attack a front flag without the ball rolling past the middle of the green with a reasonable swing. So if you're hitting a 5-iron, that ball lands near the hole on a front flag and the ball rolls over the back of the green. It's probably time to start considering a hybrid. And I think a lot of players fall into that category. And going back to what James said, loft is always your friend. If you're making an error, always go too much loft versus too little, because that getting the ball up in the air, there's a false concept that lower shot will go further, and that's not the idea. If you watch the players on TV, that ball goes very, very, very high, and that's why they carry the ball so far. So, that's the biggest thing. We're not talking total distance. We're talking carry distance, and that's what makes a player better. That being said, going back to the no 3-woods, I take the 7-woods, 5-woods. We'll even fit them with an alternate shaft. I'll put a 3-wood shaft and a 5-wood to allow a player, a little bit easier shot off the fairway, but also be able to hit it far off the tee. So, you know, a lot of it, again, is you have to get with somebody that understands the dynamics of the swing and how to, you know, how to fit clubs, because nobody's the same. And that's the thing. We have to build into that player's thumbprint and the dynamics of their own golf swing.
Yeah, and those are both great points, guys. You know, you're exactly right. A lot of players, you know, think they can kind of just buy off the rack and maybe with a few adjustments here, and really it's not the case. I mean, you know, you're out there, you've got 14 clubs in the bag. They're all there fundamentally for providing a purpose, if you will, in helping you achieve whatever goal you may have. One of the questions I have, and I'll throw this to both of you, and feel free, whoever wants to chime in first. I'm not going to go either way. But how much should there be between each of the clubs as far as distance? So let's say if I'm hitting, and we'll just take as an example, if my 7-iron, if I'm hitting 160 yards, if I'm maybe a little bit better player, or even 150 yards, how much of a difference or how much additional length should I be hitting the next club up and the next club down? Should it be very close to one another, or, you know, is 5 or 10 yards between clubs, is that acceptable? Your thoughts?
I'll jump in on that real quick there. I think that's part of the problem, too, is a lot of players don't need every club in the bag. As I was alluding to earlier, there's a point of diminishing return where they start to go the same distance. I think probably as a general rule of thumb is a 10-yard gap. I would say, and I don't know if James may take that a little wider or not, but especially with a beginning player, I'll take somebody that's a raw beginner and give them a few hybrids, a 7-iron, a 9-iron, and a sand wedge, plus a putter, because then they're going to learn to hit their shots. But, you know, the biggest key is that we don't have 2 clubs or 3 clubs going the same distance or roughly the same distance.
Right.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
That's exactly right,
James?
Bill. Yeah, definitely.
You agree with that as well, James?
You know, yeah, many of those players, you know, where they have already, and sometimes, you know, they've invested in clubs without us, and so they have a bag full of 14 clubs, and the 8-iron's going as far as the 7, the 6 hybrid's going as far as the 5, and, you know, it's really just a waste. You know, there's 3 to 5 clubs in the bag that they're really just not ready for yet. And, you know, if you take them out of there and they don't have them to look at and try to make a choice, it just makes it easier for them to, you know, get themselves around the golf course.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. And that's an area that often I think gets overlooked by a lot of players out there, is they don't factor in, you know, what you guys were just talking about. And a lot of times there's duplication in the set, even though they have different clubs. A lot of times some of the clubs are going the same distance, and it's really a waste. They need to have a better repertoire, if you will. All right, Bill, I'm going to start you off on this one, and then James, by all means, I want you to jump in as well. But, you know, this is a common theme, I think, that we hear out in the golf industry, in the business, but there's a lot of information available on golf instruction. How does the average player whittle it down to what's useful? Bill?
Yeah, that's a lot of that is incumbent upon the coach and the instructor, I feel. You know, because there's a lot of information. James and I are in a couple of Facebook groups and some blogs and things like that, and it's amazing some of the things that people try to impress upon people that are physically impossible. I think the biggest key is when somebody's, you know, trying to get a good instructor and a coach is results. Find out from some of the people that they've coached. Do they get results? Do they get lasting results? You know, it's not so much, you know, do they teach a great swing? Well, what's the definition of a great swing? Who's the one that's perceiving this? What we want is effective and consistent. You know, if we can get a player to take their scores from what used to be a good score and turn that into a mediocre score, and then then they're getting better, that's the biggest key. And I think results is what we have to look for. It's not the beauty of the shots. You know, everybody's going to hit some great ones. Everybody's going to hit some poor ones, no matter what level you play. But the biggest key is that the coaches have to show people they have to be accountable. And they have to be invested in that player, not just saying, okay, here, switch your grip a little bit, and that'll take away your slice. That a lot of times doesn't do it. And that's, I think, I think where you're going with this is why people are averse to taking golf lessons. I feel it's, they have to do a little research into the coach and really find out who they've taught and what kind of results they're getting from their type of level player. And, is it something that's going to last with me, or is it going to be something that, I have to come 4 times a week for the rest of my life to be able to, even see a shot or two come off my handicap?
Yeah, and that, you have to be very suspect of that as well. If you've got to come 3-4 times a week for the rest of your life, my opinion, unless you're, being coached for something specific, I think you got to be careful of that. James, let me just expand a little bit on this because, one of the things I think too that as players or golfers out there as a general rule, I think there's an onus not only to maybe investigate the professional a little bit, but also they have to be willing to bring something to the table besides their pocketbook and their checkbook. They've got to be willing to bring the willingness to be receptive to whatever they're being taught, but engaging, and also be willing to take what they're learning from their coach or teacher professional and put it into practice, not just show up for a lesson and then the club sit in the garage for 2 weeks until the next lesson. What are your thoughts on that angle?
Yeah, that's a great point, Ted. Where the players, I actually have a few clients now that I see on a weekly basis, and many times whenever they arrive to their next lesson the following week, and I try to find out how they've done, and they haven't been able to get out at all. And, sometimes that's okay, but if the same client is in making not only an investment, but an investment in time and they, when you're making that investment, you want results, just like Bill said, and that's the ultimate key. If whenever you're getting results, you don't have to market at all. They tell their friends, and your lesson book is always full. The results are the key. But there's no question, I probably have a handful of clients now that they travel a lot, and they actually come and have their lesson, and they look forward to that. Even whenever they haven't been able to practice, they're still, here to listen and get better. But if they could, if they were able to get out there just that little bit more, than the results that we're looking for on their handicap, would obviously reflect that improvement much faster than what they might be gaining at that time.
Yeah, and I think one of the key questions, as both of you know, on Tuesday mornings I co-host with LPGA professional Cindy Miller on the Women of Golf show here on the blogtalkradio.com network. And one of the things that we talk about, and Cindy really hammers this home, is really we need, as coaches and professionals, need to ask the question up front, and this is going to lead me into the next question, but we need to ask the why they're there in the first place. If this is just a social thing for them, they don't really care if they get a whole lot better, and it's just a way of maybe getting in a group lesson, or maybe they just want to get out of the house once a week. That's okay. But if they're sincere about really improving their game and wanting to get better, then we need to understand as coaches the why they're there. What is it they're looking, what are their goals, short and long term? We need to help them uncover that. And if they're unsure of what they are, then we need to help guide them as best we can based on the information they're giving us. And this brings me to the next question. And James, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm throwing it back on you first, my friend.
Okay.
I've been asked this question before myself. I'm a newbie. Where do I start? How do I start? I want to play golf. I've never played before. Don't know a lot about it. What's the 411? How do I start? My journey in golf.
I start all my newbies day one on the range and hitting short clubs, sand wedges, pitching wedges, probably up to 7-iron. And with that, I get them on the golf course as soon as possible. So for me, it could be day 2 of our lesson program. And my particular lesson program for a beginner, I have a 5-lesson program. to help them get going. It usually lasts about 45 minutes. But as soon as I can get them hitting the ball off of a tee, I use a tee a lot at the beginning for all the newbies, I actually take them straight to the golf course, and I try to do so by lesson number 2. And we actually go close to the green. Instead of playing, necessarily right from the tee box on a wall, to make it too difficult, I go a little closer to about 100 yards, and we work on having a certain score, say like we try to make a 4 or a 5, and we work our way backwards. So I try to get the new ones on the course as soon as possible, because there's something about that feeling that they have that they're on the course already. And, I go out, obviously, where there's not other play around. So if I'm in the morning, I go backwards on the back 9. But it's amazing how hooked they are literally on day 2, because they were on the course. Even if they didn't, hit the best shots, but they have 1 or 2 that they hit in the air. They get on the green, they hit a couple of putts. If we get 2 holes in, great. But if we don't, it's no big deal. And typically after that, they're in my lesson book for a while.
Yeah, and that's a great way to start. Bill, what about yourself? I mean, again, going back to what I said earlier in the earlier part, obviously we need to have a conversation. We've got a new player that's coming out. We want to make sure that they're prepared and that they're committed. So what are your thoughts on how do we handle a new player to the game?
I got to agree with James wholeheartedly on the ideas of getting them close to the green on the golf course, because I tell you what, that you have the hook in. Once they see the beauty of that place and they can hit shots and realize they can be successful, now all of a sudden you've got somebody that's going to be extremely committed. And I think that's a big key that we miss out sometimes. Yes, we do have to spend a little time on the range at first, or even around the green in the pitching area where we're hitting 50, 60-yard shots. They all of a sudden see that ball flying up in the air and going in the direction they're expecting it. That's a huge amount of progress, and it builds so much confidence with them. One of the things also, when we get to that little next step with that player that plays, maybe once a month, twice a month, that's the one I find that's very difficult, because so many times the newer player, they're putty in our hands, and we want to know why they're there. They want to play with their friends. They want to play this. They want to play that. That's the easy one. Now it's the next one that's doesn't play a ton, but wants to play a little bit better. I always go through, I don't want to say it's a long interview process, but I ask them a lot of things. We have about a quarter of a mile in Chicago between the clubhouse and the range. So I ask them, I really pick their brain. And the last question I ask, what one shot will make you play more golf? If you hit one shot, if you master one shot, what shot will that be to make you play more golf? It may be the driver with some player. It may be hitting a wedge shot. It may be putting better. It may be mastering their irons. And I think that's something that we forget so many times. We get somebody that's got moderate ability and has played moderately. We want to take them right away. I hear somebody goes, well, we have to start working right at the hole. We have to putt first. Well, if I've got a gentleman that gets off the late shift and he gets out to the golf course at 7 in the morning, he has an opportunity to go play. If he hits his driver straighter and doesn't lose balls, he's going to play more. We got to get that taken care of first. The rest we can kind of get in step, and we have to be very sensitive and listen. When I tell younger professionals, I said, we have so much technology today, we fail to realize we have 2 of the most wonderful pieces as coaches, our eyes and our ears. And we do not use, we use our eyes. Some of the younger professionals, and a lot of professionals in general, use their eyes decently, but they don't use their ears. And I think that's something that lets the player know that we're invested in them. I don't worry about anybody else. I worry about that player and their spikes standing on my lesson tee, and I want to make sure that they're going to be leaving there very happy and feel like they're accomplishing things and getting better and enjoying the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point, Bill. We want to make sure that we listen. I can't agree wholeheartedly, and I'm certainly all for technology. I think it's great. But I've said many, many times on the program over the years that if we rely too heavily on the technology, one of the worst things that I've seen, and I've seen this sometimes, just nonchalantly drifting into a pro shop somewhere or into a facility, and I won't, tell them who I am or I'm in the business or anything like that. And, and I'm not trying to say this as a criticism, but I'll actually watch the pro, and he's, in front of his machine, and he's not even looking at the student. And he's purely watching through a monitor. And there is a time and a place for that, but if you never even look up and make eye contact with the student or actually listen to what the person's telling you, then you're doing a disservice, in my opinion. And I think you're right. I think that we have to get back to, and this is something that we need to instill into the next generation coming up, is that they understand that, yes, let's use the technology to our benefit, but let's also make sure that we understand that the person standing across from us or beside us is a human being. They're not a machine. So we need to be cognizant of that.
Exactly.
Bill,
exactly. And I just had one little sidebar on that. Exactly. And
sure.
I think that's the thing. The application is one of the things when we have that personal engagement. It's not what you tell them. It's how you make them feel. When they start hitting that driver or that wedge the way that they expect to, you've made them feel wonderful, and they're going to embrace this game even more.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest fears, particularly for female golfers, especially coming out, they're already anxious enough, especially if they've never played before, they're new to the game. They know that traditionally it's been a male-dominated sport for many, many years, so they already have a preconceived notion, okay, that, I'm coming up into the pro shop here, I'm trying to, I've got a lesson today, so they're already a little bit nervous. And if they sense, and believe you me, women have incredible sensory perception, if they feel that person is not engaging or listening to what they have to say, their concerns and that, right away you've lost that student. You might as well, say goodbye right then and there. They want to know that you're listening to what they're saying because, first off, they're trying to understand and learn something that they've never played before, and they're already a little bit behind the eight ball because they already have that preconceived notion that this game is not for them or traditionally has not been for them. So we have to get over those hurdles. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to listen to what their concerns are, what their needs are, and what their wishes are, and what goals they may have, and then build from there. Great answers, guys. Bill, take a deep breath, and we're going to go on the flip side of that question. We don't have a newbie, but we've got, and I know we've kind of asked some of these before, but it's always good to keep them fresh, I think. We've got a player that maybe hasn't played in several years, but maybe they saw something on TV, were talking to a friend, and kind of gotten bitten by that bug. So they want to know, how do I begin again? So they've maybe played for several years of their life, stopped for several years. How do we jump fire their enthusiasm?
I think that's a great thing. And, we always worry about the growth of the game. If I can go on my little soapbox here for a moment. We have a lot of players
Sure.
that used to play 4 to 8 times a month. Now they play 4 times a year. We have a trained
Yes.
segment there that we can get after. And these are the guys you're talking about and the gals you're talking about. Mm-hmm. If we can get these players to play 2 more rounds a year, think what that, the millions of players that have done this, if we can get them to play 2 more rounds a year, what impact that's going to have on the golf industry. Biblical.
Oh,
it's going to be so huge it's not funny. And I think that's one of the things that we have to go to. And again, it goes back to what you were saying, listening, Ted. Listen to what they did well and listen to what their shortcomings were. Get that part that they did well, get that back right away. And it won't take very long to do that. Then we can start to work on the areas that were a bit of a troublesome for them. If they come and say, well, I was a very good iron player. Okay, and I played to an 8 handicap. Now I'm like a 20 and I haven't played. We work on the irons. We make a little tweak here or there. Get them hitting those shots really good. Now their confidence is back. That's the biggest thing. It's, again, how you make them feel. You get a player like that. You get them confident. Look out. They're going to get back at it, and they're going to get back at it hard. And, I'm not trying to disparage other people, but you have to listen. It's not what I want to tell you. It's what they need to hear to make them play better. And again, it's pretty simple. I've seen players on the range. They're rolling the ball. They haven't played much. I said, okay, let's take a little look at your setup here. Let's look at your balance. And all of a sudden, they're right back to that's the way I used to hit it. I said, well, that was like pulling teeth without Novocaine, wasn't it? It was pretty that was pretty painful. And they're like, no, it wasn't. I said, well, now let's go work on that wedge play that you used to struggle with. And it's amazing how we have to be very sensitive to the player. We don't have to tell they don't want a lecture from us. They don't want to know all the physics and everything else. Yes, there are some people that want to hear that. They want to hit better shots. They want to score better. It's simply put what we need to impress upon our players.
Yeah, you're exactly right. James, I'm going to let you chime in on that as well, but I want to go back to something that you started, but obviously Bill agreed with as well. And that is with, a lot of new players, we want to get them out to the golf course fairly quickly when we start working with them. And I was just sitting here thinking about that, and I was sort of applying it to sort of another analogy. I mean, we all remember as youngsters, some may not, obviously, in the current generation, but our generations anyways, when we first learned how to ride a bike, of course, many of us maybe had training wheels. Well, optimally, we wanted to get those training wheels. My father, when he taught me learn, how to ride a bicycle, I had those training wheels as a kid. And he wanted to get those off as quick as possible because he wanted me to feel confident and get over that fear. And it really equates to getting people out in the golf course. If we spend so much time with new golfers on the driving range and they haven't been out in the golf course, by the time they get there, their anxiety has built up so much and anticipation and fear starts to creep in that they're actually afraid when they get out on the golf course because they've never experienced that. So I like the analogy that you both put in there. Let's get them out there as quick as possible. Yes, we need to do some range time to, get things tuned up, but let's get them out as quick as possible out in the golf course so they overcome that initial fear and anxiety and are actually looking forward to getting out there instead of spending several weeks on the range or on a practice facility before they even step out in the golf course. Agree or disagree?
Totally agree.
Absolutely, 10,000% agree.
Yeah.
You will. And that goes to juniors as well. And I think that's one of the things that we've missed with a lot of these junior clinics. We don't get them on the golf course fast enough. We need, whether it's just getting out there and 10 yards away and the little people hitting a shot. Oh my goodness, that's just. I mean, that is because the range is one thing. That's a beautiful place. The practice area is a beautiful place. That golf course is the mecca. That's the place. That's when they get out there. That's when the hook gets in.
Yep. Oh, for sure.
That's right.
James, let's go back to the last question I gave Bill, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of similar thoughts and input to it. But, we've got a lot of players. He raised an interesting point. We've got a lot of players out there. I mean, I've talked to people who have actually studied, some of the country clubs out there, and their memberships, obviously for various reasons, have dwindled down over the years. But of the current healthy membership that they've got, there's a lot of guys and gals out there that are not playing very regularly. And we need to re-engage that. We're always looking for new golfers, but what about the ones that are already there? What do we do to get them fired up and get them back out in the golf course?
Well, actually, I have a couple of those right now that just started working with who have recently retired, in their mid-60s and haven't played golf for a really long time. One of the guys, actually, he and his wife are working with me. And it's really the same thing, that they haven't played in years. And, you have to get them onto that course. And feeling like they can go out there and join other couples or other friends at the club and not be intimidated. And I would even say that there's a good number of men, especially those who haven't played in a long time. One of the guys I work with, he's actually not playing right now because he wants to improve his swing and his game so that he's not embarrassed to be out with the other guys. And meanwhile, he's actually better than some of them. But in his mind, he doesn't feel like he's ready. And we know that, not to say it negatively, but, our girls, no matter how much they've played, so many times they're nervous to go out on the golf course or make a mistake in front of, the folks that they're going to have dinner with that night at the club. And trying to figure out and getting them out there, showing them that they could actually hit a shot over the lake and they don't have to worry about it, and hit a good tee shot here and there, and score. Maybe they're not going to make a par, but let them know and that if they make a double or a triple bogey on the hole, well, lots of the other members at the club are doing the same thing. So, I think a lot of times they just have a notion that they feel like they're afraid and they want to be confident, like Bill said, and you just have to get them out there and show them that they can actually do it. And they'll absolutely, as soon as they hit those first few shots and get back into it, they'll realize that they haven't lost anything. They can still hit the golf ball and not be nervous to be out there with the other folks at all.
Yeah, and well said, James. And that goes back to what I mentioned a few moments ago, guys, is that anxiety that a lot of people, not just the new golfers, but even golfers that maybe have played 20 years and have stopped for one reason or another, getting back out there, that anxiety creeps in there again. And we need to, this is where listening to our golfers it becomes critical, because a lot of times they will tell you, they may not tell you directly, but indirectly, if you really listen to what they're saying, you can almost hear the anxiety in their voice. I'm not really playing that well right now, and so that they're uncomfortable. So how do this is where it goes to what you just guys talked about is, how do we make them comfortable again, that they're willing to get out on that first tee? Because even for the best players in the world, they'll tell you, week in, week out, certainly they're a little bit more comfortable, but they even get a little bit nervous sometimes, especially in a big event. So nerves are okay, but it's how we handle ourselves out in the golf course. Bill, I want to flip back to you with a different question. Mm-hmm. This is one I've had before. I'm sure you guys have had this as well. We've got a player out there, and maybe he's married and has a couple of kids, but he's the only one in the family. He says, I want my family to be a golf family. Any advice? What would you tell him? How does he get the rest of his family interested in the game enough that they want to go out and maybe take part? Make it a family event. This is the era of family again. How do we get everybody jazzed up and say let's get everybody out playing golf as a family?
Well, in my estimation, the things that we've done, I've always tried to keep. Especially later in the day, I'd rather have one car pulling in the parking lot with 5 people getting out than having 5 cars with one person getting out, and that's the family dynamic. There's definitely a lot of programs that a lot of courses are running now. Ours, Balmoral Woods in Illinois, we do something $2 a hole after 5 at night all summer long. So if a dad comes out, costs him $6. All the children under 12 play for free. If they don't have clubs, we have some U.S. kids clubs there. So we make it extremely affordable. But, giving those opportunities, and unfortunately, a lot of times, those opportunities aren't available. We need to try to create those, whether it's family clinics, whether it's junior play days. We do a junior play day on Sundays, and we'll allow the folks to come out and play with them. I mean, it's just, that's the type of thing, because, for the simple, not to go back into a religious idea, but I always go, the family that plays together stays together, for lack of a better term. And, that's something, we've tried to have that kind of, I don't want to get on my soapbox again and sound like the Reverend on Sunday, but that's the kind of things that we have to be able to do and be open to as coaches, and then impress that upon our operators that they have to do these type of things, because this is what's going to build their future players. We seem to get into a point now with our juniors. The guy wants his family to play, or the mom wants the family to play, and the others don't. We always seem to want to take these kids and try to get a scholarship out of them. But the honest truth is, in this business, if we don't get every kid a scholarship, that's fine for the game. What we need to do is find these kids that are going to shoot. They may shoot 81, might be their best round, but they're going to play Saturday and Sunday every week. They're going to play 8 rounds a month plus 2 times during the week, 10 rounds a month. That's what we need to build. I mean, that's what's going to give the game the gusto, and it's going to last forever. And I think that's the biggest the kid-friendly thing with the family given them a lot of options to be able to come out to the club and enjoy themselves. And, I think that's one of the things it's been a detriment at times with some of the course owners and some of the clubs. They don't want the kids out on the golf course. Well, guess what?
Right.
Y'all are going to die someday. And this club is not going to survive unless we have a new players here, and sooner the better.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And unfortunately, the mentality and I'm certainly, let me just preface this, I'm certainly not blanketing everybody because I know there's a lot of great efforts going out there, but traditionally the country club mentality was, the man joined, the wife, his partner, of course, was eligible to attend different functions, and there might have been some key functions here and there where the kids were invited to join in. But traditionally, it was a couples thing. They might have some dances. They might have some special functions, that sort of thing there. But it was sort of a hands-off policy. The problem is, you hit it right on the head, Bill, is this. The next generation's coming up. One of the downfalls of our industry is the perception that a lot of people have had for years is that it's an elitist sport. It's not for me. Nobody's asked me. Nobody's inviting me. And I know there's a lot of great folks out there that are changing that, but it needs to happen on a national, and it needs to happen a little quicker, because I've spoken to a lot of people. I've had guests on the show that have point blank come out and said, this is one of the problems with golf, is the perception is that I've got to go for that scholarship. If little Johnny or little Susie says I'm interested in golf, right away they're trying to funnel them into their college career on the golf team. Well, maybe they don't want to play collegiate golf. Maybe they just want to go out and have some family fun, and they just happen to see somebody on TV playing golf, and hey, that kind of looks cool. I'd like to try. So let's back off, James, a little bit, and as Bill said, let's not funnel everybody into the same platform, and let's just make some family fun time again. What are your thoughts?
No doubt about it. You guys are exactly right. That most likely all the clubs that are really successful now, whether they're private or not private, they have changed their programming and made it more for the family, without a doubt. And I'll even commend my own facility, because they have done just that. We have family days where they go out and play 9 holes, 9 and dine, instead of it just being husband and wife, it's a family deal. And on the golf course, we have kids' tees. And, and it's set up for them already. And then what you all are just talking about actually just gave me a couple other ideas, thinking about the history of golf courses. And, there years ago, whenever I used to work out of the state of Florida, there were golf clubs, where certain, like ladies couldn't play until after 1 p.m. on a Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
And,
right.
all of that has obviously changed for the most part, but yeah, how do we, instead of it just being like Saturday morning as all the men's groups, why does the Women's Golf Association only play on Tuesday? Or, why doesn't every weekend have like a little junior golf association going where there's a little block of times that, they're open for the kids to go out and play and be chaperoned by parents if necessary. There's ideas to engage the entire family, and there's no doubt if we get dad and mom and the kids even interested a tiny bit, and they weren't yesterday, then that, is a huge difference economically for our business and survival of the game for sure.
Yeah, and let me just say this, to the folks listening out there, obviously there's been a lot of great strides made in the golf business over the years. I don't want to take away from that. We still have a few more hurdles to get over, and hopefully, we'll start moving in that direction here very quickly. But one thing that I think that the industry still falls a little bit short on, just kind of what you were touching on there, James, I'm just going to kind of expand it, is I don't think the golf industry just realizes the purchase, and I'm going to put quotations on that, the purchasing power that women have in the marketplace.
No doubt.
So much of the media and so much of the marketing is going to the guys. Let's get that new driver. Let's get that. But the truth of the matter is, dollar for dollar, women buy more consumer goods by far, and that's not a criticism, but that's the truth, than any man. And why the golf industry would not want to embrace and get more women playing in these golf courses, because women will traditionally, if obviously there has to be value there, but will purchase more than the men will. I mean, men are lucky if they get a golf shirt or two a season. Usually it's a Christmas gift or it's a birthday gift or something, or they might see something. Women will go out and buy several outfits,
right?
Just to play the same week. And that is a lost marketing potential for the golf industry. And they need to change that attitude. And the only way that women are going to do that is if the industry as a whole is going after them. And I got to give props where props are due. Is the LPGA organization has really, over these last several years, really stepped up those efforts, not just to get players out on the LPGA Tour, and not even just about getting more women in the teaching side, but just women in the golf industry or around the golf industry, or even just out in the golf course. They've really done some great efforts. I know a lot of guys have too, but we've got to give props where they're due. All right, I want to move forward because I don't want to get on my soapbox. Obviously, I'm very passionate about women's golf, but my last question, and James, take a deep breath, and then Bill, I'm going to go to you next. James, some players have reached maybe, and we'll just throw a number out there, maybe a 10 handicap. They were once a 25, they're now doing to a 10, and they've kind of plateaued. How do we get them to the next level? They want to get better, but they've kind of plateaued. What do they need to do?
Oh, that's a great question. Best
to last.
The first thing is, deep breath, I'm ready. Distance. It's hard to say whether or not distance would be a big deal for them. Getting from a 10 down lower, is all short game. So if somebody was at that handicap and came to me and said, what do I need to do? My first thing that I would say is I have to take them on the golf course, because I have to see them in action and how they play to be to shoot 5 over par on the first 9. And so once I would see that, I would assess whether or not their length is really, if they're hitting it as far as they should be, and whether or not trying to challenge that or help them hit it further is worth it. And then lastly, short game all the way, how many putts they have, because for me, I specialize in putting, so I'm going to look at that, and then how they are with their wedge, from 120 yards in. Are they hitting the green or missing the green, and why? So definitely short game. I'm going to look at their yardage a little bit, whether or not their equipment is the right equipment. It's amazing how many people, even have the wrong driver, even though they think it's the right one. So that kind of assessment on the course, and then move forward.
Yeah, I agree totally with you as well, James. Bill, it goes back to an earlier point we talked about when we were talking about the equipment. James just touched on that. Sometimes it might be a matter of the equipment. Maybe some of the clubs they've got, there's a lot of overlap. Maybe there's some yardages that they're not getting to or they're missing out on because they're not properly fitted. So there might be some discussion there as well. But what are your thoughts? We got a 10 handicap. He's hitting that plateau, and he can't seem to will it down if his life depended on it. What do we do? What's next?
Yeah, I agree with James wholeheartedly. We get them on the golf course because that's the best place to analyze. We can tell where they're losing shots. I use a perfect example. I have a player that really struggles from 85 to 105 yards. Yet, they'll hit the ball to 100 yards on a par 5 laying up or in a short par 4. So my thought would be I stand up on a 300-yard par 4, and they're going to lay up with a 200-yard club. I said, well, why would you do that? Well, that's what everybody does. I said, well, you struggle there. You're good at 50 and you're good at 120. So either bomb the driver as close as you can or leave something way back. This is where that,
right.
and it may not be a full shot all the time, it's that half shot. We get those half shots
Yes.
to begin to add up, and that's where you start to take it away. Also, I want that player to own it inside of 10 feet. We got to get a better make percentage inside of 10 feet with those putts. Where's that come from? Proximity to hole. That's the biggest key. We find that player getting the proximity better. We analyze that on the game. And one that I'll give where I won't watch is I have a player say, okay, you go out and play in the morning, you go out and play at night. Here's what I'd like you to do, or if it's slow. I'm going to script it out. You call me up and tell me, I know the golf course. I'm going to script out 9 holes for you. I want you to drop an extra ball when you're playing. One at 25 yards, one at 35, one at 40, one from the rough, one from a long fairway bunker. That's 35, 40 yards short. I want to see what you're scoring there because that's going to give me a real good indication of how your proximity is either working for you or working against you. And that gives me a big way to formulate a good game plan for this player. And I think that's one of the things that we forget about so many times is the playing lesson. We've got all the maestros that are sitting here with all the technology. And again, I'm not besmirching them. It's a wonderful thing.
Right.
The game is not played on the range. It's played on the golf course. We have to be able to get out there, get our hands on, and see what's going on out there. Their routine may be all over the ball yard. You know, I tell players they want to play more consistent. There's 2 things as a human being we can do consistently. Stand up to the ball correctly consistently and think consistently. Now, those 2 are like chasing the tail there. You start setting up poorly, you start thinking poorly, all the way down the line. So, you know, my thought is, you know, as James said, you got to see him on the golf course in action because you can learn a lot of things out there, and it may be something very minor that they're doing very inconsistently, and now you can get them, you know, you can get that 10 down to a 5 pretty fast.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know what's that's a great point. Great point, Bill. You know, one of the things, too, that a lot of people don't realize is coming from a 25 down to a 10 is certainly much easier than coming from a 10 down to a scratch player. You know, if you look at most of the tour players, if you ask them, they will tell you that getting those, you know, 1 or 2 extra strokes off their game is much harder than it was for them when they first started out because obviously they got much bigger gains. So when the player gets down to a 10 handicap from, let's say, a 25 where they started, and if you look at what they did, more than likely it was ball striking was maybe an issue. Obviously some distance was involved. Putting, you know, there's all kinds of areas of the game. But once they get down to a 10 handicap, you can pretty much bet for the most part they're hitting a pretty decent ball most of the time. They're probably putting pretty good too, but there's probably some areas of their game that we need to tighten up. And also maybe their course strategy, maybe what they're doing out in the golf course, they're making some mental mistakes that might be costing them those couple of extra strokes. So, you know, you have to get them out in the golf course, as you both indicated, both now and at the beginning of the show. Let's get them out in the golf course as quick as possible, and let's do an assessment to see, okay, how did they get from point A to point B, and how are they handling themselves around these 2 or 3 holes in this playing lesson. Let's see where some of the you know, chink in the armor, where the weak links are, and let's address those issues specifically. Great conversation, guys, tonight. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, but we're down to the last couple of minutes. But you guys come up with some great answers tonight, and yeah, it's the hour blows through quick, doesn't it?
It sure does.
I want to give you guys. Yeah, I want to give you guys a couple of bullets, and you'll be able to put your feet up and relax. You guys have had a busy day today, and we got a couple more minutes left. I know that, but I want to give each of you an opportunity, of course, to let the folks know here in just a minute how they can reach out to you. But we do have a couple of minutes, actually. So let me just ask each of you, and James, I'll let you go first. What are some things, very quickly, that you would like to see different in the golf industry that maybe is not happening? Now, what are some suggestions, ideas that you'd like to share with maybe some of your fellow pros and some of the listeners out there? What are some things that you'd like to see different or added to what's currently going on?
You know, the one thing that I see the most that is, I guess, in a way hard for me to believe is sometimes during the day when you would want your golf course to be busier, it's not. So I would say that there's, you know, maybe missed opportunities, and where maybe the courses, and not to say that the pros aren't doing the best they're doing, but it just seems like times of day where all of a sudden the tee box is empty, and whether that's 3:00 in the afternoon or it's 11 a.m. or whatever it is, especially during the week, and obviously folks work. I think there's where we could be reaching out better to our communities and getting our our courses. We have in our area within even within 5 miles there's thousands of homes, right? And thousands of homes, and you have to say to yourself, wow, it's like whenever I first started teaching full time, and at the facility, nobody was really teaching. And in my mind, I said, wow, if I start teaching full time, and if I even just do a reasonable job, I can't imagine that out of 5,000 homes within a couple of miles that I couldn't have a 25-hour-a-week schedule at least. And, and you do the right things, and you reach out to that community, and you get folks involved who are not normally involved, and they're joining your club. So I would say that, the claim is there's lots of golfers that are leaving golf, but there's also lots of golfers that are starting golf. And, we have ages,
right.
Folks are retiring, some can't play anymore. But so I guess that's my main deal. I would love to see more reaching out to the community, to everyone in the community, and finding some way to get them over to your course.
I agree wholeheartedly. Very quickly, James, the folks that want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
James Kyle Golf Academy. My academy is out of East Lake Woodlands Country Club, which is in Oldsmar, Florida. My website is jameskylegolfacademy.com, and you can find me via email or phone on my website. I'm obviously available person in person, and also do a fair amount of online coaching, which is a lot of fun. A couple of great clients over in the United Kingdom right now. But other than that, that's where you can find me. And Ted, thank you so much. It's been a great time, and also with Bill.
Perfect.
Thanks, James.
Bill, just some quick thought. Thank you, James. Bill, quick thought on what you'd like to see, maybe something added or different that you'd like to see to the industry to do?
Well, the first thing is, and James knows this very well, I would prefer to see a lot of the coaches that have to continually besmirch others just to be quiet for a second. They're creating a lot more confusion in the coaching industry, and that is absolutely detrimental to our game. They won't tell you why what they do is right, but they'll tell you what you do is wrong. And I think that's an absolute disservice. It's up to me to show the player why it works and why it does. And for some of the coaches to get out there and start saying, well, that doesn't work. Well, why? Give me tell me why. Showing pictures to people of Hogan when he hit it poorly, or Johnny Miller when he hit it poorly, that's the gospel. And I think that's something that's created such an amount of confusion with amateurs, and they don't even realize what they're doing half the time. We'll get people that'll get on and they'll bloviate terribly, and I think that's one of the things. We don't have to be consistent, and we never will be consistent. But one of the things we can't do is create chaos for our own self-worth because you don't have a real good method of doing it. And I hate to say that, but that's one of the things I find with players, because a player will come to me, well, this is the way you're supposed to do it because so-and-so said it. I said, well, they may feel that way, but I'll show you why what I'm telling you will work, and it will work consistently for you. And, it's just amazing. I think that's one of the things I'd like to see is a little more respect from some of the other coaches that really, they don't have a hook to hang their hat on, and they're out there bad-mouthing everybody. And I think that's that's a real big problem, and especially as people are trying to take lessons, they don't want to get into these controversies. I always have the saying, you're not going to get worse before you get better. And how many coaches will say, oh, you got to get way worse before you get better? I'd never go to a doctor, and I've said this to you before, Ted. If I had a lump on my shoulder, and the doctor goes, oh, you're going to get way worse before we get that thing cut off. And I'm like, guess what? I'm going to the next guy down the street because I'm not going to listen to this. So, I think that's one of the things I'd like to see my industry do a little better job of is, put a sock in it. And if there is something that you're doing that's better, please let us know what you do that's better. You know, show me what it is. Don't just tell me what I'm doing is wrong. And I think that's something that, you know, and James is pretty sensitive to this. We've had a little discussions on this before. I think that's one of the things that we miss terribly is people are trying to, you know, self-promote themselves, and really, you know, they're standing on a ladder with one rung that's about ready to fall off. And I think that's one of the things that has to happen is, you know, you have to be a little more respectful and mindful of other people. And in our industry right now, that's not the case. Whether it's, you know, courses, clubs, everybody, we have to be a little bit more mindful of the player. And we're not mindful of the player. We're getting our own egos and attitudes in the way.
You're exactly right. Let me make two very quick points, then I got to let both of you go. Bill, sorry, very quickly, let the folks know if they want to reach out to you, how they can go about do that.
Yeah, for the winter months through mid-April, I'm going to be with the Golf Channel Academy, Coral Springs, and we're located at TPC Eagle Trace and also at Heron Bay Golf Club, which is just northwest of Fort Lauderdale Airport. It's probably about 35 minutes from either one of them from the Fort Lauderdale Airport. They can reach me. They can go to my direct website, BillAbramsGolf.com, and find my contact information there. But I will be with the Golf Channel Academy for the winters. Once middle of April to May, I'll be back at Balmoral Woods Country Club in Crete, Illinois. And same thing. You can just go to my website and find me there.
Well, guys, as always, thank you very much for coming on the Coach's Corner panel tonight. You guys did a great job. Two very quick points. First point, just to what you were talking about, Bill, and then I'm going to let you both go and make way for my special guest tonight. But I couldn't agree wholeheartedly. I think that as professionals, I think we have to be mindful that there are always a set of eyes watching us, not only on the golf course but off the golf course. And if we're not being respectful to one another, it's only going to end up being to our own detriment in the industry. So we have to be careful of that. And James, to your point about how we can reach out to the community, one thing that was always very successful when I was in school, I can remember classroom trips, you know, whether it be to wood shop or home economics for the girls or whatever the case may be. I think a great way for golf industry to really grow the game is to reach out to their local schools and invite the kids to take class trips to the local golf course. Very, very inexpensive to do so. They don't have to get on the golf course and necessarily play. We can maybe set up some workstations. I know that's already happening, but that would be a way to certainly spark some interest in some young kids and hopefully future golfers of the game. But food for thought for the golf industry out there. I know it's already being done in some areas, but it needs to happen more of a national scale. James and Bill, thank you very much, as always, for being on Coach's Corner tonight, and I look forward to you guys coming back again next time. All right, have a good one, guys.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good night.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks again for having us. Take care. Have a good evening, everybody.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, that was my very special guest on the Coach's Corner panel, James Kyle and Bill Abrams, both great golf professionals, and always love having them on the panel. I'm very excited tonight for a couple of reasons. Always I love doing the shows, but also have an opportunity to really, my next guest is just got a wealth of knowledge about the game, has been around the game for many, many years. He's affectionately known as the Little Pro, and I'm, of course, talking about Eddie Merrins. He's a legendary golf instructor. He's a PGA Hall of Fame member, and also a club professional at the Bel-Air Country Club. And he just has so much to his accolades, if you will. In fact, there's too many. I can't read them all out. But let me just tell you a little bit about him, and then I'll bring my very special guest on tonight. He wrote a very interesting book a number of years back called Swing the Handle, Not the Clubhead. It's obviously had a tremendous amount of success. We're going to talk to him a little bit about that tonight and some other things. He was born in August 4th, 1932. His hometown is Meridian, Mississippi. And he's been inducted into multiple Hall of Fames. He's also been the men's golf coach at the UCLA in 1975 to 89. Also started a great organization foundation called Friends of Golf. We'll talk to him about that as well. And has had 16 career hole-in-ones. And I've got one particular that we're going to ask him about here tonight. But please welcome my very special guest this evening, Eddie Merrins. Good evening, Eddie, and welcome to Golf Talk Live.
Well, thank you, Ted. It's great to be with you and with your audience.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. I know it's not always easy after a busy day, and I know you're out in California, so we're a couple of hours different, but this is still some daylight, I think, for you out there. It's a little dark out here in Florida, but I'm glad you could join me this evening.
Yeah, we're still licking our wounds from the Dodger World Series. So more power to Houston. They played great.
Yeah, they did. You know what? I was telling somebody very quickly, and then we'll move on, but I was telling somebody the other night that it was certainly one of the most exciting World Series that we've seen. I mean, they're all exciting, but probably in the last several years, and certainly congratulations to the Houston for coming through and clinching it. But yes, I'm sure there's a lot of very unhappy people in your neck of the woods, but they have nothing to complain about. They played a great series, and I know that they'll come back with fury next year. But let me just ask you something that I like to ask a lot of my guests that are obviously in the golf industry. You've as I mentioned, you've been around for many, many years in the profession. But I want to ask an obvious question. What brought you to the game? Not so much, let's not talk about instruction right at this point, but let's talk about what first drew you to the game of golf, and roughly how old were you when you first picked up the game?
I was 11 years old when I began to play in Mississippi. In the summertime especially, you don't have many choices. You play golf, you play tennis, you swim, and then in the winter you might play football, you might even play baseball, and that's about it. But there is no such thing as winter sports in the South.
No.
So,
no.
But my young friends in Meridian introduced me to the game of golf when I was 11. Theretofore, I'd played football and I'd played baseball, and I was very much like most all-American boys into sports. But when I began to play golf, I just put everything else aside. I dare say from the time I began till I finished high school, I didn't miss 5 days a week going to the golf course. I'd go after school, or when school was out, I'd be on the golf course most of the day. And it took. I really became hooked on the game. And I'd like to see youngsters today find their way to golf, and I think that's truly happening before our eyes. When you think of the problems that are presented in football with the head injuries, and you think of the allegiance problems and whatnot, the game of golf gives you everything you could possibly want as a youngster, growing up, gaining the culture vibes and also understanding what competition is all about. And I think the Augusta National Golf Club taught us all a lesson when they started the drive, pitch, and putt contest 3 years ago. They gave the PGA, the USGA, the R&A the way to go to grow the game. They've been trying to figure out how to do that. Well, they learned how to do that. Now it's a matter of implementing it. And no better organization is qualified to do that than the PGA of America with its 28,000 members.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And we're seeing so many great strides happening now within the organization and really throughout the nation to really get a lot of the youngsters. I couldn't agree wholeheartedly with you, Eddie, and you're exactly right. I think that we need to get at the youngsters as early as possible. And I think that, you know, once they get out on the golf course and sort of get a feel for the game, they don't have to master the game, obviously, at 7 or 8 years old. But once they kind of get a taste of what it's like to be in a golf course and what it's like to get out there on the putting green or you know, what have you, I think that just as many of us as we get bitten by that bug. And obviously somewhere in your early part of your career, you were bitten by that bug, as a lot of people refer to. What's specific about the game? I've always equated golf, Eddie, to really life. There's so many similarities that parallel life out on the golf course. You know, we get faced with obstacles, we get faced with decision making that we also have in our life. Were there any life lessons that you can recall that you learned while you were out in the golf course that you've applied to your everyday life?
Well, my case was unusual in this sense that I began playing with grown men, mature men, by the time I was 14 years old. I started when I was 11, so it took me a couple of years to catch on to the game. But by that time, I was actually shooting in the 70s, and the men in the little club in Meridian, Mississippi, the Northwood Country Club, used to invite me to play with them. And it was a great maturing process. Instead of playing with young boys and girls, I was playing with grown men. And I was competing with them, and we'd be playing for quarters or $half or dollars, and have a little something at stake in competition. And they would take me to tournaments as well, to invitational tournaments within a 200-mile radius of Meridian. And so I matured quite early through competition and through playing with grown men. I actually, I guess, missed part of my youth growing up because I didn't spend that much time with youngsters other than competing against them in the competition that I began to play later.
Yeah, and as I said at the beginning, and I was telling the two gentlemen that were on before you, of course, members of the PGA and teacher professional, and your son Mason, of course, sent me some information, obviously your bio, and I was saying to both of the gentlemen off air that there was so many accolades that you've earned over the years, and just credits to your career, that we would literally use up the whole hour and then some just reading them all out. But I want to share just a few that were very interesting. And as I mentioned, and I may have the number wrong, but I believe there were 10 Hall of Fame that you were inducted into. Obviously,
actually,
you had
last Monday, I was inducted into the California Golf Summit Hall of Fame, the first ever California Summit PGA Hall of Fame. And that was the 12th one that I'd been inducted into. And I'm very proud of each and every one of those because they're so meaningful to me, And
yeah, and I knew it was getting up in double digits. I wasn't sure if it was 10 or 11 or 12. I had actually stopped counting because I had to come on the show at number 10, so I knew that it was, and I did remember that there was another one. But obviously, it's obviously a very humbling as well to just know that you've done so much for the game. And I didn't. I mean, I've known of you for many, many years, and even I didn't realize just how much you've done for the game. And one of the other things that you did was very interesting as well is you were a men's golf coach for UCLA from 1975 to 89.
That's right.
I want to
14 years.
I want to ask you specifically. Obviously, you helped the youngsters, and I say youngsters because they're younger than I am. Help them with their game and help them reach their maximum potential in order to do that. But obviously, it's a little bit different working with collegiate players than it is with individual golfers out there, because now you're focusing on a team effort. Even though golf is traditionally an individual sport, there has to be a sort of a team mindset. What were some of the things that you tried to instill with the players that you work with at UCLA in order to get them to work together as a team?
Well, first, let me say I'd played college golf myself. I went to LSU on an athletic scholarship in 1950 to 55, and they weren't very plentiful in those days, the athletic scholarships, the full rides. But I'd won the Mississippi State Amateur, and I'd won the JC National Junior, and on the strength of that, I was awarded a scholarship. So I did play college golf, and I had a pretty good record in college. I managed to win the Southeast Conference Championship twice. I won the Southern Intercollegiate Championship. I went to the finals of the NCAA Championship when I was a sophomore against Jimmy Vickers from Oklahoma. He beat me one down on the finals, and I've hated him ever since. But, yeah, I spent a lot of my young years competing in college golf and amateur golf, and all of that prepared me when I had the opportunity to assume the coaching at UCLA. I was asked by the chancellor of the university, Charles Young, to coach his team because the UCLA athletic program was replete with all kinds of winning teams, and they were big in the Olympic sports, but the golf program was probably the weak link on the totem pole, and he didn't understand that. He didn't know why that should be, and the reason being the coaches before me didn't have the opportunities that I had to raise the money and to do the things that are necessary in order to build a winning program. So I jumped at the opportunity for two main reasons. One, it was an opportunity to take a program that had not been so good and build it into a great program, and we won awards as having the finest college golf program in America toward the end after my 14 years. And the other reason for doing it, it was a way for me to express my ability as a teacher through the medium of competition represented by those young college players. And I think that learning process when I was coaching UCLA made me a much, much better teacher of the game of golf, because we were into the art and the science of playing the game as opposed to just hitting a bucket of balls or seeing how far you could hit it or seeing if you could get it in the hole. We were into playing the game, and I think most teaching in today's world doesn't really teach you to play the game as well as it might. But I think that's the next learning vista with the game of golf. You're going to see much more accent on playing the game as opposed to just swinging and hitting shots.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that, Eddie. And let me just, before I bring in the sort of the next question, we're going to talk about, of course, your book, Swing the Handle. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to ask you just on sort of the back of what you just said. Do you think that over the last, and it might be maybe decade, that the industry has sort of drifted down this technology road a little bit too far? Not that technology is bad, and gotten away from some of the basics of golf instruction and teaching. Do you think that's really what's happened here? And as you said, maybe it's going to start coming full circle and getting back to more of the teaching side of things. What are your thoughts?
I think that's exactly right. I think it has become a little too technical, and you can't really learn from a book. You can learn some ideas, but learning golf, you can learn a lot of ways. You can learn by pictures, whether they be still pictures or moving pictures. You can learn from example from others. You can learn by the verbal word. I think the most lasting way for you to learn are word pictures that lodge in your mind. If somebody can sew a picture in your mind that explains the golf swing and explains the shot and the swing you're trying to make, it's going to be there forever. It's in your brain forever, and you can call on that whenever you want. All the other methods of teaching are here for the moment and gone the next. They poof, go up in smoke.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I know, and again, not to criticize anybody in the industry, but I know from when I've gone down to, as an example, in Orlando every year, of course, they have the PGA merchandising show, and there's always, the latest and greatest next thing, even in the equipment side. And I know you've seen all kinds of beasts, if you will, of equipment out there from its early days to what's out there now. And the technology, Jack Nicklaus, of course, has been critical of some of the technology and some of the equipment, that it's just making the ball go too far and really making a lot of courses. Even for a while, he talked about Augusta National for a time was even becoming almost obsolete to some of the current players. What are your thoughts on the not just so much technology, but with the equipment as well? Do you agree with what he said, that they need to
I believe everything that Jack Nicklaus has. I believe everything Jack Nicklaus has to say. I think he is the epitome of champion, and he's accomplished more than anybody who ever lived in the game of golf. And I agree. He for years ago he produced the Cayman ball when he was in the business of producing product, and it was designed for short courses where you could play with a monitored ball, and you got the sensation you were playing a full golf course. But that's carried over in his thinking to today's market, where he thinks that the ball, if anything, goes too far, whether the ball is too hot or whether the clubs make the ball go too far, or whatever the case may be, he thinks it needs to be rolled back somewhat. And I think most people would agree with that, because otherwise all your golf courses are outmoded and your record book is for nil. The records don't really mean anything the way they hit the ball today, the length at which they hit it.
Yeah, I agree as well. I'd like to see some changes there as well. Eddie, I want to obviously give you an opportunity. I know we can't get into everything specific because we'd be here for a long, long time. But you've created an incredible book called "Swing the Handle, Not the Clubhead." Explain for the golfers as best you can. I know we don't have the ability for visual here on the program, but as best you can to help people understand what you actually mean by that phrase, swing the handle.
Okay, well, when I turned pro, I was 27 in 1957, and I was fortunate enough to go to work at Meridian. I was a playing pro at the Meridian Golf Club under Fred Austin. Fred Austin had been an Ernest Jones disciple. Ernest Jones probably gave more golf lessons one-on-one than anybody who ever lived. And his book, believe it or not, the title of his book was Swing the Clubhead. And in my studies at Meridian, for the benefit of my own golf game, because I turned pro to play golf, not to teach golf, but in my studies, learning the game and then having to teach, it occurred to me on that practice tee at Meridian that you really do not swing the club head, and you do not accent the hands as most teaching had you do in those days. Hands and club head were synonymous, and they were featured in almost every teaching realm. And in truth, you hold the club with your hands, yes you do. But what do you hold? You hold the handle of the club in your hands. And what do you do with it? You don't eat with it. You don't paint with it. You don't write with it. All you can do is swing it. So you've got something tangible to swing, the handle of the club. Then the next question would be, all right, now, how do you do that? You do it with your forearms. Why? Because there's no way you can swing it any other way. You cannot take the club from the starting position, swing it to the end of the backswing, and then swing through the ball to the end of the forward swing any way but with the forearms. I mean, you can try doing whatever you may with the body, but that golf club is not going to budge until your forearms move it. So it just simplifies the thinking, and I dare say the thought alone as well as the book have had great influence on the progression that you see, because one of the things that I've noticed with the tour players 40 years later, they used to swing to the ball, and there was a lot of hand action at the ball. Today, they don't stop at the ball. They swing through the ball, and that's a huge improvement. And it leads to what you see today. They hit the ball farther. They're using the entire strength of their body as well as the better equipment that they're using. So that combination is causing those golf balls to go out of sight.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about what you talk about, Eddie, is I watched one of the videos, of course, that one of many that you've done on Swing the Handle, and it was very interesting, and I want you maybe just to expand a little bit further on this point, but you equate it to in tennis. You sort of draw a comparison between tennis and a player there. Again, explain for the listeners out there tonight how a tennis player uses that same theory when swinging the tennis racket.
Okay. I think the analogy is beautiful, because what does the tennis player do? If he has the racket in one hand, he uses the one forearm to swing the handle part of the racket. In today's vogue, the tennis stroke often is a two-arm stroke, call it a double backhand, whatever you want to term it, but they're using the strength of both forearms to stroke the shaft of the racket from one side of the body to the other. And it's very, very effective and very strong because you have the total strength of the body, the right side and the left side at work. Well, a golf swing is exactly that. And if you equate the two instruments, they're the same. You've got three component parts. You've got a handle, a shaft, and a head. A golf club has a handle, a shaft, and a head, as does a tennis racket. It's pretty obvious the tennis player holds the racket in his hands, and he uses his forearm to stroke the shaft from one side of the body to the other through the ball as he does so. A golfer should do exactly the same thing. So, as I said earlier, it's a great word picture, the thought of the tennis stroke as applied to golf. And if you want to really prove that to yourself, put both the golf club and the tennis racket in your hands at the same time and make what you think is a two-arm tennis stroke, a double backhand, if you will, and you're making a perfect golf swing. And all of a sudden, that picture lodges in the mind, and it's there to be called upon whenever you want it.
Yeah, and you know, when I watched the video, I think it was a YouTube video where you were explaining that, and you know, I momentarily kind of closed my eyes and I was visualizing what you were talking about, and of course it just made so much sense. And I think what's kind of interesting, and this sort of leads me into the next question, Eddie. You know, you've had obviously the opportunity throughout your career to see some of the greatest players thus far that have ever lived. Everybody, you know, from Ben Hogan to Nicklaus to Palmer, and even some more recent players, you know, of course, Tiger Woods.
That's right.
But what is it that they're doing right that the average amateur isn't doing right? What are some of the differences? Obviously, they're scoring better, but what is it that the pros know that the amateurs don't, do you think?
Well, I think when you start comparing the eras, you've got to go back 100 years, and you start with Jones and Varden and Ray and those guys, and Hagen and Sarazen up through Hogan and Snead, and then Nelson, and up to Nicklaus and Palmer and Watson and Player and Trevino, now to Woods and Spieth and all the guys you see today. And it's been a transition, but all of those players had their certain run, their era, if you will. And how in the world do you compare players? The only real comparison that makes any sense is how many majors did they win? That's really the only accurate barometer that you can use to compare players of a different era. Jones won 13 majors, and Nicklaus won his 18, and Woods won 14. But Palmer won whatever he won, 9, I think, and Player won 9.
Yes.
Watson won 8, and then there are a lot of them who won 1. That puts them in the major category. But when you're in the major category, the next question is how many majors did you win? And it's a pretty accurate barometer, really, when you start comparing the players. Compare Nelson with Sarazen, compare whomever with whomever. Hagen is a little bit distorted in that he won the Western Open at least a half dozen times, maybe more. In those days, it was considered a major, and it isn't today. But he had a great record, as did so many of the others, and the foreign players as well.
Right. What's interesting, Eddie, when you look back at a lot of the players, and this is always something that kind of baffled me, maybe you can shed a little bit of light. When you look at some of the earlier players and you compare them to today's game, where the pitch-perfect golf swing seems to be the norm, that's what they aspire to. But yet when you look at players, as some of them you named, even Nicklaus, but Trevino and many of the other older players of that generation, when you compare their golf swings to one another, they were very uniquely different. They might have had certain key elements that were the same, but you know, obviously if you compared Trevino to some of the other players, I mean, he was way out there by comparison. But yet you look at today's player, this pursuit of perfection. has it really helped them, or do you think it's hurt them, in your opinion?
Tiger Woods was a prime example of that. He was never satisfied. He kept searching for perfection and never quite found it. But he found other things along the way that caused his demise.
Right.
But I found my answer this way, Ted, and I think your audience might appreciate the analogy. I had a problem when I was at UCLA getting my players to believe in what I was presenting, because I was convinced that swing the handle would allow them to win a national championship, and that's why I was there coaching and presenting what I did. But I didn't give them credit, because most of those youngsters who were scratch players or better when they came to college had been trained by other people. They weren't trained in swinging the handle. So I was a little selfish in getting them to do things my way when they'd been successful doing things somebody else's way. And I realized that if we're going to get around this roadblock, I better figure out a way to do that. And the answer came to me this way. I saw the opening of the Olympic Games back in '84, whatever the year was, and I saw 200-plus countries parade by in the opening ceremony. And I said to myself, I didn't know there were that many countries in this world. And they speak a different language, or if not a different language, at least a different dialect. But they're there to play a common game. And that was my answer. Yes. And that's exactly what swing language is all about. You can have a different swing language, but beyond the language, you've got to play the game. And that's where the next learning vista is bound to be when it comes to learning golf. You can stand on your head and swing if you care to, but that's your method of going about it. It's your language, so to speak. But beyond the language, there is a game to be played. Like in the Olympics, they may speak different languages, but they're competing in a common game.
Yeah, well said, Eddie. And I couldn't agree more. You're exactly right. I think one of the things that I've seen in the last at least decade, if not longer, was certain elements of the golf instruction was sort of pigeonholing, what I call pigeonholing everybody into the same form. In other words, they weren't treated as individuals. If you follow this theory or you follow that theory, you're going to be successful. And that may work for some, but we're all uniquely different, as you just pointed out with the Olympics. And I think that this was something that has been detrimental to the industry as well, as trying to put everybody in the same box, because we are uniquely different. Everybody swings a little bit differently, as you just pointed out. And again, there may be certain core fundamentals that may need to be true, but essentially we are all different. And I think that once you understand that we all speak a different language, so to speak, then I think it becomes a little bit easier. I want to ask you, I mentioned in the sorry, go ahead. Did you want to add something?
No, I'm just saying that can be differences, like differences in language and dialect. Now, all of a sudden, you can understand how there can be a Lee Trevino swing, or there can be a Jack Nicklaus swing, or there can be a Tiger Woods swing. All those guys are doing it their way, but they're competing in a game beyond the swing, and they're very successful at it. And they have the trophies to show for it and the championships.
Right, exactly. And I agree. I think that more golfers need to pay less attention on, how they look out on the golf course, and more about how they're actually applying their game to the golf course. And I think that they would have much more enjoyment. I think too many people have bought into this idea that they have to, stand in front of the mirror and just be perfect all the time. And, even the best of players, as you know, Eddie, yourself, made some bad shots. We may not see them on television all the time, but they've made some pretty ugly shots in their career, but yet they still, as you said, managed to bring home the trophy. So I agree wholeheartedly. I want to ask you about, I mentioned in the opening credits that you've had 16 career hole-in-ones And one particularly I want to talk because it really, yes, it stood out to me, and that was in 1964 at what was called then the Bing Crosby National Pro-Am, of course held at Pebble Beach. You shot a hole-in-one on hole number 7, 107 yards into
probably the most photographed hole in the world. 107 yards downhill, and would you believe I hit a 3-iron? And that tells you the story of how that hole can play when the storm is coming in off that ocean. I remember Palmer went through that hole a couple of holes before me, and he used a 4-iron, and he got his ball up in the air, and it peeled off like a seagull into the ocean. Sneed, when the storm was bad like that, Sam Sneed used to putt the ball down the hill. He'd run it down the hill into the bunker and then get it up and down out of the bunker to make 3. But you could just ruin your week right there on that little hole, that little 107-yard downhill hole. And each year in the AT&T now, it used to be the Crosby, they show that hole over and over and over again. And occasionally they'll mention the story about this obscure pro who had to hit a 3-iron once upon a time and knock the ball in the hole in the Crosby. Well, that obscure golf pro was me. That was my main claim to success in the Bing Crosby tournament. Thank God for Bing inviting me some 14 times to play in it. He was a member here at Bel-Air, by the way.
Right, I know that. And of course, you've helped Bing along the way in your career, as you have with so many other. I mean, the list just goes on and on of not only golf professionals that have played out on the PGA and LPGA tour, but just the list of celebrities is longer than both of my arms. Just so many. Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, Jack Nicholson, and just the list goes on and on and on. So obviously that's a credit to your teaching. But I want to ask you about something else.
In common, they're chasing that little white ball. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, it was interesting times for sure. I want to ask you something, Eddie, about an organization that you created, actually a foundation that you created called Friends of Golf. Tell us a little bit about how that came about and what was sort of the idea behind it for those that maybe aren't familiar with it.
Well, that began from my coaching experience at UCLA, which began in 1975. And you don't win stakes races with claiming horses, as somebody once said. You got to have the right horses in order to win championships. And I was in the throes of recruiting the right players. I recruited Mark O'Meara, Johnny Cook, Bobby Clampett, on and on. I went after the players that I knew I had to have in order to win. But these boys were going to college and they wanted to play where there'd been a winning team. And UCLA had meager success in the past. So no matter what I had to say, they were going to choose to go where they thought they could win. So that was a bit frustrating, and it led me to start recruiting whenever and wherever. So I did a people-to-people trip to England back in '76, and I kept reading about the teenage sensations, Lyle and Faldo, Sandy Lyle and Nick Faldo. I said, I'll pull a coup. I'll just go recruit these guys. And sure enough, I met with them, met with their dads. They both wanted to come to UCLA, brought their grade transcripts back to UCLA, and the university laughed at me and said, these boys aren't about to get in UCLA. So that was one of the roadblocks that you have to face as a coach, And finally, we succeeded when we recruited a skinny little 140-pound player named Corey Pavin when he was 17 years old. And Corey was successful. He won the Junior World. He won the LA Men's City. He was a semifinalist in the USGA National Junior. And he came to college, and he didn't play so hot the first year. He made some improvements in his golf swing, began to play well toward the end of that first year. But the second year, he won more tournaments than any player in college. He won 6 golf tournaments and was a first-team All-American. And he went on later in his final year to be the College Player of the Year, making the Walker Cup team. And then when he turned pro, he won the U.S. Open, and he's been Ryder Cup player and captain. And his success led other people to want to come to UCLA. And that's exactly what you have to do. You've got to have stakes winners in order to win stakes races. You've got to have blue ribbon winners. And he proved to be that, and we attracted other players. And finally in 1988, my 13th year, we did win that NCAA championship that I thought we could win after 5 years, but it took us a little bit longer to do that. But there are some 400 teams or so setting out at the beginning of each year trying to win that thing.
Right.
So it's not an easy thing to do.
No, for sure. You know, when you fast forward to today's game, you know, obviously I know you have a chance to I'm sure, watch a lot of golf when you can, but in today's players, both male and female, let's start with the guys first. Who really impresses you and why?
The male players, I'm impressed by all of them. Spieth, I think, has the character that most golfers would like to possess. Plus, he can putt, and you can't win in the big leagues unless you can putt, and he can really putt. And
yep.
I'd put him in the league with Ben Crenshaw with a putter in his hands, or Dave Stockton, another great putter who achieved greatness with a putting club. But women, the UCLA has had 2 girls in their women's program who became the top amateur player in the world, and that's within the last 5 years. And they also had a boy, Philip Cantley, who became the top amateur player in the world. Well, just think of that. There are a lot of amateur golfers out there in this world, and to be named number one in the world is really quite an accomplishment. But I know that UCLA had 3 examples of that in their program, and we can all take pride in that. And we didn't quite answer the Friends of Golf query that you brought up. We formed that in 1980 as a fundraising for the UCLA program. When you're coaching, you don't just go out and play tournaments. You have to raise the money. You have to recruit the players. You have to get the courses. You have to do all of that. So to make the program work, we started our Friends of Golf program in 1980, and it grew monumentally in that after 5 years, we had an honoree in the form of Lee Trevino, and then we had Byron Nelson, and then we had Arnold Palmer, and then we had Nicklaus, and we had Floyd, and we had them all. Every golf player of any note, even the year Nicklaus was the honoree in our Friends of Golf outing, Tiger Woods was here representing junior golf and high school golf, and that was the meeting place between those 2 guys. And we've had so many wonderful things happen in that program, but we kept the program even after I gave up the coaching, because it had become so popular and we were doing so much good with the fundraising effort. We have raised over $8 million that we give away to colleges, high schools, caddy programs with the proceeds from that event. It's been an unbelievable a model fundraising effort, but so many people are to be appreciated for making it work. But we've had cooperation from every player. Dustin Johnson was here last year as the honoree. You know, he came here after the Masters when he had to sit out, but he made it here, and we have a water hazard some 340 yards from the first tee that no player had ever driven over. And I want you to know that he hit 6 balls over that creek in the exhibition that he conducted. And he was coming off the injury he had at Augusta. But,
that's
Faldo and
that's incredible.
Furyk to be the honorees this coming year. Nick Faldo and Jim Furyk, the current Ryder Cup captain and a previous Ryder Cup captain. But these guys give of themselves because they do that, knowing if they don't do it, the game doesn't grow at the junior level, and it has to grow there. So that's why they give of their time and effort. And it couldn't be more thankful than that.
Yeah, and really like no other game, Eddie, I think golf just epitomizes about giving back. So many of these great players, I mean, we see them every week in and week out on tour, both men and women, but yet we don't see sometimes a lot of the things that go on behind the scenes, like what you just spoke about, where they're actually doing something to give back and to help grow the game. We don't always hear that part of it. We hear, the good shots they made in the tournament last week, or maybe the bad shots they made, but we don't always hear about some of the things they do away from the golf course that really give back and help the golf game, and thank you for sharing that. Eddie, I've got one last question I want to ask you, and I'll even give you the opportunity to use the UCLA as an example. If you were sitting in front of the UCLA golf team and one or more of the players said to you, Eddie, I really want to make it out on tour and I want to play professional golf once I'm done my collegiate career, what advice would you give to them? What pearls of wisdom, if you will, would you instill to them to help them make the right decisions?
I'd let them know that they're first at this university to get an education, and second to play golf. And I want them to get that education. I never tried to lure a boy into our program with the idea that he was going on to professional golf, even though we had countless examples of those who succeeded. I'd just as soon see them become an attorney or a doctor or whatever the case may be, and enjoy their life beyond the game of golf. The professional world out there looks appealing and looks dramatic, and it's kind of like the old days in the movies where young girls and guys were attracted to that industry. But and the golf tour is attracting them the same way. But there's a lot of heartache and disappointment out there, and you spend a lot of times chasing your tail, if you will. And it'd be much better. You would enjoy the game that much more if you continued to play it at an upper level as an amateur player, but had a nice job that could provide your home and your family and everything that goes with becoming an older person.
Yep, you're exactly right. And I've had the pleasure and opportunity on this show to interview some great up-and-coming players, both on the Symetra and even the web.com tours, and, just to sort of pick their brains, if you will. And you're exactly right. There are so many great opportunities, and it is a struggle. Some of them have had some success very early on, and others continue to struggle as they continue to to move through their career. So it is a very difficult. It's not all glamour as some might think. It's a hard grind out there, and it takes a lot of dedication. So you're exactly right in your analogy. It's something that if it's eating away at you and you want to get out there, by all means, certainly give it an opportunity. But it's not easy, and it's not always glamorous. So I'm sure a lot of the players that don't do aren't at the top of the leaderboard could probably shed more light on that, I'm sure. Eddie, I want to thank you. I hate to say this, but our time is winding up. It was probably one of the fastest hours I've ever had, and I wish I could extend it further. But I would like to say this to you. There's so much that I know that you could share with the audience. So I would like to, at some future date, when it's convenient for you, I would like to have you come back on, because there's literally 1,000 things that we could talk about. And
I'd love to come back on.
Knowledge.
And I've enjoyed this hour much more than you might realize, and I've enjoyed speaking indirectly to your audience. And I hope some of it rubbed off. I hope.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Well, I will definitely be in touch with you, and we'll set something up for sometime in the new year, and we may even add a few others into the mix, and maybe they may have some other questions for you as well. Maybe some of your fellow professionals out there that might want to come on and talk to you as well. So we'll do that.
I'd love that, and if I could get a copy of this show one way or the other, I'd love to have it too, for posterity's sake.
I certainly will. I will email that out to you, and I'll also send it to your son Mason just to make sure. But lastly, let me just ask you this real quick. Your book, Swing the Handle, of course, I believe is still available. Can you maybe share with the audience where, if they want to get a copy of that book in whatever version, where they can go to get their hot little hands on it?
The Swing the Handle book is pretty much out of print, so you'd have to go to Amazon or one of those companies that do collect the old books, but it is available. And I've done a more recent book called Playing Around with the Little Pro, and it's a combination of instruction but anecdotes from my career involving all the people I've had the opportunity to encounter and other experiences from my life. It makes it an interesting read. It's a great read, and the instruction portion is very readable. So I would recommend they get that. That's produced by Simon & Schuster, so any bookstore should be able to get that, Simon & Schuster. And the title is Playing Around with the Little Pro by Eddie Merrins.
Well, I would love a copy of that, Eddie. That sounds like a great read. And as I said, there are so many more parts of your story that we can share. And as I said, unfortunately, I only have an hour at this time to give you, but I promise you I will have you back anytime that you want to come back and continue the conversation. But Eddie, I just want to take this opportunity, not only on me, but on behalf of my audience. I just want to say thank you very much sincerely from the bottom of my heart for giving me this time this evening and afternoon in your case on the Golf Talk Live. I know my audience will enjoy it, and I will definitely send you a copy when it's completed.
Well, I've enjoyed every moment, and may all of them look forward to swinging the handle.
Well
Those
said.
are my
Thank
parting
you, Eddie.
words. Thank you. Thank you, Ted.
The best parting words.
Thanks to your audience.
Thank you, Eddie. You're very welcome. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, that was my very special guest, Eddie Merrins, the Little Pro, as he's affectionately known as throughout his career. Just so many great stories that I know that he could share, and I will have him back on again early next year sometime when it's convenient. We'll work out the schedule with him, and I might even see if he'd be interested in coming on a Coach's Corner panel as a special guest panelist. I think he would have an enjoyment of that with some of my fellow professionals. But on behalf of the guys on the Coach's Corner panel, James Kyle and Bill Abrams, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed tonight's segment of Coach's Corner. Hopefully you took away a few nuggets that will help you with your game, maybe making some decisions on how you want to approach your game, and maybe even taking a look and dusting out that old golf bag and getting rid of some of the old clubs that maybe aren't producing the way they should be, and putting in some new ones. Make sure you speak with your local golf professional, and they'll help you assess that quite nicely, and so you want to make sure you do that. But also, I want to I can never emphasize enough on this show. I want to take this opportunity to really thank all of you, the listeners worldwide, for faithfully tuning into Golf Talk Live each and every week. And as I always say, I do have a great amount of pleasure and enjoyment of having a number of highly talented coaches and teach professionals, like my special guest tonight, Eddie Merrins, and authors and entrepreneurs stop by. And it's really through their participation and guest appearances that have helped to make Golf Talk Live a first-class show. Also, a special thanks to my sponsors and supporters of the show, Mr. Jonathan Laird, the editor and owner of South Coast Golf Guide. If you go to southcoastgolfguide.com, you can check out all the great things that you'll find in the guide. Or if you want your hot little hands to get a copy of the official guide, you can reach out to Jonathan Laird on southcoastgolfguide.com, and he'll be more than happy to send you a copy, or let you know where you can pick up a copy as well. It's available in many of the local courses throughout the southeastern part of the United States, literally from Texas right over here to Northwest Florida and all points in between. So you can certainly find out where you can get your hot little hands. A lot of great information in the guide, so make sure you check out southcoastgolfguide.com. Also, Meredith Kirk, 2014 Mrs. South Carolina, and also a great LPGA teacher professional based out of Myrtle Beach. You can go to her website, meredithkirk.com is her website. Thank you, Meredith, for all of your continued support. Nikki, of course, a great golf professional. Nikki and his lovely wife, Tiffany Litherland. Thank you for all of your support and helping to spread the word throughout the years. I really appreciate it very much, and much continued success on your end, Nikki, as well, and your lovely wife, Tiffany. Mr. Bernie Pinder, of course, the owner and founder of Ontic Golf, a great line of customized putters. If you go to onticgolf.com, you can buy yourself really a great product, all customized putters available at onticgolf.com. Thank you, Bernie, for all of your continued support of the show. Sean Kelly, of course, the owner of linkedgolfers.com. Linked Golfers, of course, is on LinkedIn, which is a huge social media platform for business types. And Linked Golfers, of course, is the largest golf group on LinkedIn.com. And, of course, he's brought it out to his own media platform, linkedgolfers.com. So make sure you check that out as well. And lastly, of course, my very good friend, Mr. Peter Doyle from Doyle Golf Solutions over in Ireland. Thank you, Peter, for all of your continued support. Peter, of course, is a great teacher professional as well as a club fitter. And thanks, Peter, for all of your continued support and spreading the word over in Ireland. Many listeners tuning into the show from over in Ireland. So thank you, Peter, for all of your hard work. And on that note, we're going to wrap it up for another show. This week I will be back next Tuesday on the Women of Golf show, of course, with LPGA professional Cindy Miller, my co-host there. We've got a great guest next week, and we'll have some more great topics for you ladies out there. So make sure you tune in to the Women of Golf here on the blogtalkradio.com network. So again, go to blogtalkradio.com. Instead of typing Golf Talk Live on Tuesday, type Women of Golf, and it airs from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the blogtalkradio.com network. We'll be back next Tuesday with a show there. And, of course, next Thursday, you can catch me back here for another round of Coach's Corner and, of course, another great interview with my guest next week, which I believe is Mr. Peter Kessler is going to be joining me next week here on Golf Talk Live, so you don't want to miss that. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. God bless, and remember to tune in each and every week right here to Golf Talk Live. Thanks, everybody.